Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Megan Ambiro. Every week, I interview interesting people who are reimagining work. And be sure to check out our Work Trends Twitter chat events calendar located at talentculture.com on the podcast page. Welcome to the Talent Culture Work Trends podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about pressure. Cue in a little Bowie, some Queen, two of my favorites. You know, stress is a normal part of how we go through life. In today's workplace, it's unavoidable. In fact, according to a study by staffing firm AccountTemps, more than half of American employees are stressed at work, a direct consequence of rising workplace pressure. And in our always available culture, the pressure to be an ideal employee is higher than ever. However, pressure can be positive. Without pressure, you don't have a clear motivator to meet deadlines or get stuff done. Seasoned managers know that if you need to get stuff done, you need a little taste of pressure. For Dane Jensen, pressure isn't just stress nightmares. It's actually a powerful motivator and our best tool to get through some of life's big moments, including that work presentation next week. Whatever you got on your plate, we know it's there. So let me give you a little background on Dane. Dane Jensen is the CEO of Third Factor, an instructor at the Smith School of Business at Queen's University, and is affiliate faculty with the UNC Executive Development at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. At Third Factor, he works to help leaders to be more effective, creative, and resilient under pressure. His work has spanned 23 countries on 6 continents. In addition to his corporate work, he works extensively with athletes, coaches, leaders, and boards across Canada's Olympic and Paralympic sports system to enhance national competitiveness. Dane lives in Toronto, one of my favorite cities, and I tell you, he's got a lot to share with us. So, hey, without further ado, welcome.
Thank you so much, Megan. It's great to be here.
There's something about Toronto. What is it?
What is it about Toronto? I think Toronto is a wonderful city in that it's an incredible mix of people who have come from all over the world and set up shop in one place. And so it is a city of neighborhoods. Every neighborhood has a very distinct and unique character. And you can almost explore the world by kind of driving around Toronto. So it's a great place to live.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Let's dive right in. Talk to me about the word pressure. What is the power here? How do we use pressure as an advantage and harness it for high performance?
Yeah, so it's a great jumping off point. The subtitle of the book is why pressure isn't a problem, it's the solution. And that's kind of deliberately provocative a little bit because I think, you'd have to be blind to not see some of the problems that pressure has caused over the past 18 months. But I think what I hope people take away from our conversation is, yes, pressure can cause problems, but also counterintuitively, pressure is also the solution. And what I mean by that is it's really the energy that is under pressure. If you think about pressure is basically kind of a big ball of energy. It's a feeling in the pit of your stomach. It's a physiological response that puts you in an activated state. It's energy. And it is the energy that's under pressure that actually gives us the capacity to handle the challenges that create it. And so that's a little bit of a flip, which is I think we sometimes think about pressure as something that we need to push away. We need to insulate ourselves from its, this contagion that we try to minimize. And to a certain extent, that's true. I mean, overwhelming pressure over time can absolutely create issues. And the solution to pressure, to some extent, is the pressure itself. And so I think, when we talk about how do we use pressure as an advantage, for me, it starts with a recognition that, as Carl Jung said, decades ago, what we resist persists, right? When we try to push it away, it just magnifies it. And so our ability to actually see the opportunity in pressure starts with a bit of a mindset flip on, okay, what am I going to do with this energy as opposed to trying to push it away?
So let's think about the fact that some of us, certainly not all of us, are going back to work in an office someplace. Maybe. So in this context, right, or your own career, how do you craft a pressure equation to use this as your advantage when we have life's big moments? And frankly, there's a lot of those lately.
Yeah. Yeah, I think pressure is something that, for better or for worse, we have all become quite intimately familiar with over the past year and a half or so. And I really, when you talk about the pressure equation, where that really comes from is I spent about 5 years just repeatedly asking as many people as I could find one question, which is, what's the most pressure you've ever been under? And it's a question that, it's almost like one of those, sometimes you just stumble on a question that's got a little bit of magic to it. Like it just gets at something really interesting. And I found that no matter who I asked that question of, they had a really interesting story to tell. And in that story, there were some really, interesting insights. And so when I asked this question of hundreds of people, I do a lot of work in Olympic and Paralympic sports, so I was able to ask it of Olympic athletes and Paralympic athletes. We work in the military. I was able to talk to Navy SEAL commanders and emergency surgeons, and but the bulk of the conversations were with regular people who are balancing work with life, with kids, with parents. And the first thing that kind of came out was that what people classify as high pressure moments spans the vast range of human experience. So I heard everything from the classics, giving a big speech, writing an entrance exam, doing a job interview, the stuff that you would expect, all the way to things like, I swam too far from shore and got caught in the current in the ocean and was worried I wouldn't make it back. Or, caring for a parent at end of life while trying to hold down a really demanding job. And so what you start to realize is that pressure kind of spans the vast range of human experience, but, and this is where the equation part comes in, when you actually start to synthesize all of this experience, what you realize is there's really just kind of three things that all pressure moments have in common. The first component of the equation is importance, which is that, we don't feel pressure if something doesn't matter to us in some way. How much pressure we feel is directly correlated to how important the outcome is to us. And so that's the first part. The second part, though, is uncertainty. Because no matter how important something is to me, if the outcome is certain, I'm not really going to feel that much pressure. And so we find pressure kind of at the intersection of, hey, this matters to me, and I don't really know how it's going to turn out. And so that's the second piece. And then the third piece that came up over and over was volume. We've, as human beings, we've had to exist in important, uncertain circumstances since the Big Bang, since the dawn of time. I think what's a little bit unique in, 2021 as we record this is volume, just the sheer volume of tasks, of decisions, of information, of distractions that surround our important, uncertain moments. And so, the solution to pressure, so to speak, from my perspective, is you want to understand when it comes to, how important is this times how uncertain is it times how much of it is there. When we can kind of understand what's dominating in terms of what's creating pressure, that's where we can start to get at our ability to manage it. Because there are tools that we can use in each of those three areas.
And let me guess, there's a word that begins with R that's about to explode onto this conversation, right? It's called resilience. Where does that fit into this picture?
I think the concepts of pressure and resilience are intricately intertwined. And so, I think pressure is what creates the need for resilience. I think pressure in many ways is both, again, the first mover in terms of the problem that creates the need for resilience, but it's also the pressure that actually feeds into resilience, because it's the energy under pressure that gives us the muscle memory to recover when we get knocked off balance. So I've taught programs on resilience for 15 years, and we always start that program by asking people, what are the challenges and pressures that you're facing? What are the things that keep you rushing, that take away the joy, that cause you anxiety? And what we hear, inevitably, Megan, is that the things that create the need for resilience are pretty similar to what I just walked through. It's, hey, I'm dealing with a lot of uncertainty right now, or I'm just dealing with so much volume that I can't get to the things that matter to me. I'm constantly getting distracted by stuff that's, maybe less important but more urgent. And so I think the skill set that we talk about when we talk about managing pressure, some of that skill set is pure performance oriented. It's like, okay, how do we access performance on demand, to use a phrase from sport? But a lot of the skill set is around resilience. How do we regain our shape when we've been knocked off balance? How do we, actually gain from high pressure periods? So I think the two concepts are intricately intertwined.
And what are the biggest challenges for resistance? How do we combat it? What do we do?
To not be a broken record, I go back to the notion of importance, uncertainty, and volume. And so I think, like, in each of those areas, there is both an opportunity and a threat. So, importance, if we look at importance, one of the keys to resilience is, over the long haul, I have to be able to answer the question, why am I doing this? Right? I need to have a line of sight to meaning. I have to be able to, see a path from what I'm doing on a daily basis up to why does this really matter to me? And that's really critical, right, for resilience. And what we find in our highest pressure moments is that can actually be overwhelming, right? We can be completely overwhelmed by how important something is to us, how much it means to us. When I talk to people who have choked, often that's the thing that gets to them, right? They're at the start line at the Olympic Games and they're going like, oh my God, this is a referendum on my life. I've been working 12 years for this. This is the most important thing I've ever done. I can't believe how meaningful this is. And so there's this interesting sort of peril and opportunity in each of these areas where we simultaneously have to cultivate it. We have to find importance. We have to tolerate uncertainty. We have to embrace volume. While at the same time, we have to be able to keep them at bay. We have to see our important moments in perspective. We have to be able to, take direct action on the uncertainty that's facing us. We have to be able to trim the volume that we're facing. So, I do think that each of importance, uncertainty, and volume are simultaneously the biggest threat that we have to our resilience, but also the biggest tools that we have to turn to manage it.
So to me, stress and pressure tend to go together like, peanut butter and jelly. So, what are we doing to handle stress in order to master these big moments you're talking about?
So this is an interesting kind of delineation, stress versus pressure. And I often get asked, so what is the difference between stress and pressure from my perspective? And often actually, when I started asking people, what's the most pressure you've ever been under? The first question I would get back before they would answer, they'd say, well, do you mean pressure or do you mean stress? And so I would say, well, you tell me what's the difference? What do you think the difference is? And, where I've kind of landed on this in terms of stress versus pressure is I use a bit of a metaphor of, a basketball game. And so, when you are watching a basketball game where you care deeply about, the team participating. So let's use, my wife is a great example here. She's a huge Toronto Raptors fan. And, to the point that when the Raptors are in the playoffs, if it's a close game in the fourth quarter, she finds that so stressful that she needs to leave the room, right? She needs to get updates by text message because it's just too stressful. So she is experiencing stress. But from my perspective, that's not pressure, right? Pressure is reserved for the people playing the game, for the people who are on the court. Because pressure requires an imperative to act. It's like, I'm not just feeling stressed, I actually have to do something. I can impact the outcome here. I have to take an action that's ultimately going to impact the outcome of the situation. And so I think, stress often is one of those things that, there's almost just an endurance component to it, which is like, other than remove herself from the situation, my wife can kind of manage it, but she can't act to impact the outcome. Pressure, I got a chance, I got a shot, I can impact this thing.
So there's a lot of us at this point in time between not knowing what kind of work culture we're going to have in terms of next year or the year after as it relates to, are we hybrid work? Are we remote? What's going on? Clearly we're all feeling some sort of pandemic pressure. How do you see pressure as a tool for success for all of those people out there like me, like you, when we're facing still what seems like an enormous amount of uncertainty? Like, how do we manage this?
And I think uncertainty has been the heavy hitter for most of us over the past year and a half. And as human beings, we are not built for uncertainty. We've evolved over thousands of years to select for certainty and safety. Those are the folks that survived. So I do think uncertainty is particularly painful for most of us. And when I think about managing uncertainty, there's kind of two things that are front and center. The first imperative under uncertainty is to minimize it, right? To take direct action on the things that you can control. And there's a wonderful little metaphor that I learned from an athlete I interviewed, a guy named Martin Reeder, who's a beach volleyball player who went to the Rio Olympics in 2016. And he talked about how when you're playing beach volleyball, there's a ton of stuff that's out of your control. The officiating's out of your control, the crowd's out of your control, the opponents are out of your control, that you're literally standing on shifting sands, while you're playing. But he said the only time where you have control, complete control, is when you're standing behind the service line with the ball. The serve is within your control. And he talks about how for him, this led him to establish a mental cue for himself, whether he's playing volleyball or not, of asking the question, what's my serve? Right? In this moment, what is my serve? And so I really do think that as we go through what we're in the midst of and continuing to deal with, I think our ability as human beings to find our serve, that is, what is the one thing that I can completely control in this moment, is more important than ever. And when we start to do that, we can create little pockets of certainty, which is what our brain really, really craves, right? That's what it's optimizing for. And the serves can be as simple as routine, right? So what is the 5-step routine that I'm going to do every morning, before my virtual commute from the kitchen, to my home office? What's the 5-step routine I'm going to do at the end of the day? The ability to get us focused on routine is one of the things that in sport we've known for years, right? I mean, when you watch a tennis player serve the ball, what do? They have a routine. They do, because you create a little pocket of certainty for yourself. And so I think that's one of the critical imperatives, is the degree to which we can focus on the controllables and create those situations where we feel certainty. It really feeds the stuff that starts to alleviate pressure for us.
Well, I have to tell you, time flies, Dane, when we're having fun. We have reached that point in the podcast where we're going to take out our crystal balls. So you take out yours, and I'll get a little music going. It might be Bowie. It might be Queen. I don't know. Somebody's feeling pressure. But, tell me, what are your predictions for the future of work? Where do you see this going next? Any of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question that everybody is wrestling with right now. And I think sometimes it's hard to separate the signal from the noise, right? What are the fluctuations versus what are the long-term trends? I do think we are going to enter a world that is a little bit of a barbell situation, as opposed to a normal distribution where you've got kind of a bell curve in the middle. I think we're going to have kind of two opposing imperatives, which is anything that can be done remotely will be done remotely. And then the in-person stuff is going to really be rejuvenated, I think, in some interesting and unique ways. When we do get together, I think the level of care and attention to detail and experience design that's going to get layered onto it, I think is going to be quite unique. I mean, the clients that we work with, whereas 2 years ago, it would be like, hey, we rented out the conference room at the Sheraton and, we called catering, we're ready for your 2-day workshop. I just think that kind of stuff isn't going to happen anymore. It's like, well, we could do that remotely.
I think it's actually good news. I find those to be entirely boring, those rooms. Like, for me, I'm like, it's my worst nightmare.
Yeah, there's rarely windows.
Well, you brought me back there, and you know what? That's a really refreshing angle you're bringing up. Like, we're doing things that might be outdoors now for a variety of reasons, but isn't it sometimes prettier and more different to be there? So, sounds like we are going to start using our creativity more and more, and that, to me, is a breath of fresh air. So I just want to thank you, Dane Jensen, for being born, and say hi to my friends in Toronto, would you?
I will, for sure. Thanks so much, Megan.
If you enjoy listening to the Work Trends podcast, do me a favor, share it with the world so we can all stay current on what's happening in the world of work. And be sure to listen in to our next podcast when I'm going to be speaking with another very interesting Work Trends guest. Catch up with you next time. Thanks to listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. Join us every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern for a live Twitter chat with our podcast guest. To learn more about guests featured on today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at talentculture.com and help us spread the word. Subscribe to Work Trends wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave us a rating, review in iTunes. Share Work Trends with your coworkers, your friends. Look forward to it. See you next time.